Hello. With how popular the Amagi has been lately in competitive games and such, a lot of people have been requesting me to cover it again, since it's been a while since I last covered it. Now, unfortunately, matchmaking decided to throw me against tier 10s and tier 9s and only, 3 equal tier ships. So that's a bit awkward. It's also 9 versus 9. So that means even more focus on me. And of course, last but not least, my ship is completely stock. I don't have the range upgrade, so my range is only 18.1. I don't have the hull upgrade, so my maneuverability isn't that great, and I only have 59k HP. And I don't even have the speed upgrade, so it's completely stock. So that's obviously a bit awkward. But the Amagi is one of those ships that you kind of get a feel for exactly how it's going to play just by playing the stock ship. If you do well in the stock ship, you'll do even better in the upgraded ship. It's not one of those, let's say, Fusos, which is a completely different ship if you play it stock or if you play it upgraded. So you don't really... It's not really the end of the world if you happen to be in a stock ship. I mean, yes, you will have a worse performance, but that doesn't mean that the ship itself will be bad, because the gun characteristics are exactly the same, which is of course one of the most important things when it comes to playing battleship, is how do the guns handle, can you pen, can you deal damage, how's the accuracy, and so forth. And if these are significantly affected by upgrading the ship, then of course that's when it starts having a huge impact. But on this ship, there's not really, it's not the end of the world. I mean, it's a downside, yes, but it's not the end of the world. Seeing if I could nail this Chapav if he continues to turn fully, but it looks like he's just gonna keep sailing away. Now, first and foremost, I'm not really sure what my team is doing. It looks like they pushed B, which I kinda liked, but now they're all turning away and sailing into A. Which is a lot of people sailing into A, which isn't exactly the best spot considering the enemy team isn't really contesting A, they're kinda abandoning it and playing safe. And our Missouri starts the game by being deleted, so that's of course an issue. Luckily their gearing gets deleted in return, so maybe not the end of the world, this one either. Now the Amagi, of course, the Amagi has a great amount of firepower. It has one additional turret, or the Nagato. It has fairly accurate guns. They do a ton of damage, and overall it's quite a strong ship. However, at range, it's very susceptible to citadels. If you give any sort of broadside, just about every battleship in the game can punish you at range. At close range, your turtleback kicks in. The Amagi does have a turtleback, just like the German battleships, but that doesn't. It's much more vulnerable at range than German battleships. Like citadeling a German battleship at range is still very, very rare, whereas citadeling an Amagi that gives you broadside as range is extremely common. Anyone can do it. It's quite an easy feat. So I turned in there to make sure that there was no citadels. A few overpens isn't the end of the world. So in general, you have to be extremely careful with your angling when you're playing the ship at distance, and you don't want to be playing too far back in the Amagi. This is of course, the Amagi, just like the IGN battleships in general, they of course benefit from slightly longer range play. Just like the Fuso, the Nagato, they are not, they are optimally played at maybe, let's say, 10 to 14 kilometers. If you get any closer than that, well, then you negate your own advantages. Of course, that is your great dispersion and your great gun power. If you get any closer than that, then other ships, for example the Bismarck, which suffers from terrible dispersion, well, he'll be able to hit you quite consistently, so your advantage of better dispersion goes out the window. And if you fight the North Carolina, if you go closer than that, well, the North Carolina disadvantage of extremely slow shell speed, well, that disadvantage goes out the window as well. So the reason why you play at this distance is not because the ship per se is exceptionally weak at close ranges, but it's more the fact that you play to your strengths. And you don't want to be giving the enemy team any advantages, any unnecessary advantages. So playing at a slight distance keeps the advantage in your court instead of giving it to the enemy. Is this Missouri gonna keep reversing? Let me see if I can nail him in that. Anyway, so that's why you keep the distance. Much like with the Fuso, for example, You don't really want to get too close to them because you have this optimal range. However, that's not to say that Amagi isn't a great brawler if the time calls for it, but you should absolutely not be charging into brawl right from the start, because you give up so many advantages when you do. You give up one of your main strengths, which is of course this great dispersion at range and this great damage you can potentially deal at range. So what I'm doing here is, of course, I'm kiting away, I'm using the Kutsu smoke left behind, and ultimately I want to get behind this island here. Grosse Kurfürst, 10k volley. Well, when he has over 100k HP, a 10k volley doesn't really mean that much. But I angle away, and in general, you are actually able to tank quite a lot of damage in the Amagi if you know what you're doing. You just gotta make sure that you are angled at all times. And that's of course one of the other strengths. An angled Amagi is extremely hard to deal with, because it's hard to deal any sort of consistent damage to you as long as you remain angled. Well, let's see if I can keep resetting this cap, denying this cap. You notice Kurfürst and the Bismarck shot at me, and they're not doing too much damage at all. That's because at this range, well, not only is their dispersion somewhat suffering, but I'm also able to tank their shells thanks to the armor quite easily. Is this Missouri gonna keep giving me this much broadside? I don't know if I don't think I can quite citadel him from this range. So aiming a bit higher. I'm not aiming at the waterline, I'm aiming a bit higher to see if I can just hit pen his deck or superstructure a bit more, or top of the hull armor even, because it's unlikely I will pierce his citadel from this distance. Already getting a few bounces here and there, so yeah, better to go for the safe damage than go for these YOLO, well, not YOLO, but dream-like citadels which are unlikely to be fulfilled. Is the Mr. Biggie gonna keep pushing? You notice my angling? He does 5k damage to me. I feel like I did a lot more to him in return. In fact, all my guns combined, I probably did like, what, 14k to him? Something like that. 10, or well over 10k regardless. And my Yamato is playing extremely safe. He's afraid of what's going on. And the biggest issue right now, if you look at the minimap, is of course the positioning of my teammates. If you look at my Iowa, he's on D4. If you look at my North Carolina, he's on E2. They went to A to hunt these guys, and in doing so they put themselves completely out of position, and they can't really help us at all. So that's why I'm playing so very, very safe. If they were here and they were actually engaging these enemy battleships, then I wouldn't mind pushing in a bit more, because it would mean they would have to deal with multiple flanks at the same time. And multiple threats for a battleship when you can't angle against one single one is of course very hard to deal with. That would be the optimal thing, but my battleships are so out of position it's unlikely to happen, so I'm just gonna retain this distance. However, the Grosse Kurfürst, I checked his turrets. His turrets are pointed away, so this is my chance to actually close the distance and perhaps get a different flank on them, because they're all focusing on the Yamato, as you can see. So when you have an allied teammate, an allied battleship, keep in mind your own positioning. The reason why I'm turning in to go to the right side of them is of course because the Yamato is on my left side. The idea here is to create a crossfire. The hardest thing for a battleship to deal with is crossfires. One guy shooting from one side and one from the other. You can't angle against both at a time, so you end up eating a lot of shells, a lot of hits on parts that aren't as well armored or angled and so forth. That's the biggest issue, because you're not very agile. It's not easy for you to adapt to these kind of situations. So that's the biggest threat to a battleship. So obviously you should be creating that threat yourself. If you see a Yamato, if I see a Yamato on my left, I could have started sailing towards him, towards the Yamato, and like ran away with him, but then I wouldn't be creating this crossfire. And you can see how I'm getting the flanks and these sides on all these battleships. They're trying to push to B, they're trying to chase this Yamato, but by pushing up and basically towards them, I create a nice crossfire, which of course gives me access to a lot of broadsides I wouldn't otherwise be getting. So this is something you want to keep in mind when it comes to positioning. Even if you're a stock Amagi like I am here, you can still wreak a lot of havoc from this side. Sadly no citadels on that Zuma broadside, but still, I think I did about 20k damage to him, so that's always nice. Unfortunately, I got no citadels on this full broadside Atago, but it looks like he is about to ground, which is of course a good thing for me. Let's see if Dispersion agrees with me this time. Sadly though, the Yamato died and the Iowa died, so I only have this one North Carolina that's sitting alone at A really far back. Oh wow. And of course I get one Citadel and one Ur Pen and every other shell misses. So RNG doesn't really like me today. And this North Carolina is too far away to be effective. So now I gotta really keep in mind my positioning. The Missouri and the Izumo, I can angle against these two fairly easily. But the issue is of course the Kurfürst who's pushing around the flank. So what I do here is I push towards him, keeping the island between me. Now the idea here is of course that if he tries to shoot me, the island will block my shots, whereas I can shoot him because, well, he's sailing out from the island. When you sail out from an island like this, it gives an advantage to the guy who's sailing in, because you can see his shells, he struggles to hit me, I bounce them because he can't hit the center of my ship, because if he tries to aim for the center of my ship, his shells will hit the island. I, on the other hand, have pretty much a free shot at his broadside this way. I even destroyed one of his guns. My earlier volley did like 13k to him. So this Grosse Kurfürst is being positionally outplayed by me quite heavily here. However, if I start slowing down now, he will catch up and his guns will wreak havoc on me. So I have to, you see, he's trying to shoot, but he's hitting the island, and if he doesn't hit the island, he's hitting the back of my ship. However, I cannot slow down because then my positional advantage will go out the window. But I have outplayed him like that now, that he's kind of out of the battle, because he's managed to put the island between himself and his teammates. So this is my chance to push in and try to pick a fight with his teammates. Now they're both tier 9s, and in fact later on I checked, this red cricket guy is actually rank 1 in ranked. So we have an Izumo fully upgraded and we have a Missouri, so not gonna be the easiest battle for me here. I tried to go for the Citadel, but his turtleback eats it. Not enough. Yes, Izumo also has a turtleback, so I didn't get enough pen to get the Citadel. Might have been just a bit too angled. And now I play it safe, calm, I wait until my back turrets are within range, I use third person vision, and then when I'm close enough, that's when I pull the trigger. And 4 Citadels and 50,000 damage, and that Missouri gets deleted. So what happened there is, of course, I often mention that North Carolinas and Missouris are terrible at brawling and you shouldn't do it. And you saw a prime example of what happened when he tried to brawl a Amagi. Even if it's a stock Amagi, he has no chance. Now the Grosse Kurfürst guns were aimed the other way. I'm trying to turn, the idea there was to turn towards the Grosse Kurfürst, delete the Izumo and run the Kurfürst to see if maybe I could somehow get a victory out of this. But it was there was too much gunpowder aimed my way, so ultimately I did go down. This North Carolina I was hoping would do something from this flank. Sadly he hasn't really done anything. All his volleys have been missing. He's giving them full broadside, and looking at him now we can see it's a stock North Carolina, but he's using the HP perk on a battleship. And I don't mean to be rude to any battleship players, but if you're using the HP perk on a battleship, you probably have no idea what you're doing. And the game ends, of course, he gets killed, and ultimately my damage is 238k damage. Considering I'm up against tier 9s and tier 10s, I don't consider this a bad score at all. In fact, this was quite a good score for the Amagi. Would have been better if I wasn't stuck, but such things happen. Got a bunch of tasks done and so forth. Moving to team score, well, a nice chunk of XP, but ultimately since it was a loss, I didn't get my bonus. And on the bright side though, I got to completely delete the Missouri, who was rank 1 as well, so that was amusing. always makes me smile when I completely destroy someone with a battleship. Detailed report wise, I mean, my potential damage is 2 million, so I did tank a nice chunk of damage, even though I only had 59k HP. And damage received, I ultimately, well, I didn't get to use a couple of the heals because I went down before that. Still 84k, that's pretty nice. Most of my damage comes, of course, from my main battery, but secondary did actually add up a bunch, mostly because I started 3 fires, which got to burn for a nice chunk of damage. So surprisingly useful Amagi secondaries. Who knew? Anyway, let's move on to my recommended build and my upgrade path for this ship. Right, starting off, of course, Consumable wise, premium repair, premium heal in that order, and if you can afford it, go for premium catapult fighter. Now I do not use the spotting aircraft on the Amagi. I'm playing on NA on this Amagi, and there's not enough Royal Navy cruisers to justify it. There's not enough smoke shooting cruisers in random battles to justify it. I liked it in ranked, but not in random. Upgrade path, well, I've gotten the hull upgrade now, I just bought it. The next one I will go for is probably the range, since the 18.1 range is pretty crippling, and finally the speed. Now of course that doesn't mean you should be sitting at outside of 18.1 km range, it's simply that there are situations you might be forced into where I found the range to be more important than anything else. So that doesn't mean, just because you have the range doesn't mean you should need to sit at max range and use it. That's just silly battleship logic. And finally of course I'm gonna get the speed upgrade. Upgrade wise, main armaments mod 1, don't want to be losing turrets. Aiming system mod 1, you want that reduced dispersion. No real point going for any others. Damage control 1, and here I actually used damage control system 2. I even used it on the stock where my rudder shift was 20 seconds. And that's because in this ship I rarely find myself wanting to suddenly maneuver in, like, unlike something like the North Carolina or things where you kind of have to keep track exactly of how you're pointed. I don't find myself in the same situation at all in the Amagi, and I actually prefer using the additional tankiness. Finally, of course, concealment to get detectability down to 13. Preventive maintenance and catapult fighter, or direction center for catapult aircraft. Using both is a bit sketchy. It's just because I happen to have the captain points for it that I'm using it right now. Expert marksman and superintendent in this order. Concealment expert. Once you have these perks, then you can go for vigilance, and finally adrenaline rush. Now you might notice that this looks very similar to my Yamato build, and in fact if we untick our module reduction thing and instead get AFT, then we have my Yamato build, which I use at tier 10. So as I've said before, when I made that IGN battleship build on my Yamato, is that it works on all IGN battleships just perfectly. And in fact that's the build I'm working towards right now, and the one I'm using on my Amagi, the one I used on my Nagato in ranked, and I think it's the best build for IGN battleships out there. Anyway, that was my Amagi stock commentary. I hope you guys enjoyed it.